Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome those that have appeared to this webinar, which is organized by the Equality Council or the Equality Board for the Icelandic higher education. My name is Halldórsdóttir, and I'm the Director of Quality Management at the University of Iceland, and I'm the Chair of the Quality Council. The Quality Council has the responsibility, among other things, to sponsor a range of activities to support the sector in Iceland in enhancing the student experience and maintaining standards in Icelandic higher education. This time, we decided to focus on internationalization of higher education institutions, attempting to explore whether the internationalization of Icelandic sector could increase the quality of their educational activities, with a special focus on newly created opportunities at the European level and the need to serve the growing multicultural population at home. Traditionally, internationalization of higher education institutions has been defined as the integration of an international or intercultural dimension into all of the activities of university, including teaching, research, and service functions. But it has been argued that internationalization as a comprehensive and purposeful approach is already quite successfully established in research, whereas internationalized learning and teaching is often reduced to mobility and language issues. It would be more fruitful to define it more broadly as an approach aiming to equip teachers and students with a mindset, skills, and competences geared towards addressing global challenges and solutions. We will therefore begin our seminar by seeking answers to the question of what we actually mean by this term, internationalization. And we will then move on and explore what could be achieved by cooperating across borders, languages, and disciplines, with a focus on the newly established European Universities Initiative, before looking inward and ask what we can do at home in supporting a multicultural learning community. Then we'll explore how international bench learning can be used to enhance our own internationalization. And finally, we will get perspectives from the students themselves on how they foresee that internationalization can improve the quality of their education. But before we move on to the formal program, we have some practical points that we want to convey to you. And first of all, we want to draw your attention to the fact that this event is being recorded and that the video will be publicly available online after the conference. It's very important that all attendees please mute speakers at all times except the one that has the word. And if you don't want to be shown, then of course you can turn off your video. I think it's easiest if you can write your questions to speakers and panelists that we'll have for the second half of the program just using the chat function in Zoom, and the moderators, myself, and then Halldórsdóttir after the break. Then we'll just select questions from the chat and bring to speakers and panelists for comments. And of course, as always, the program maybe is a bit tight, but I hope we can squeeze in a couple of questions after the presentation of the speakers in the first half of the program. Then we want to draw your attention to a seminar that is being organized by That's it, yes. It's an upcoming seminar organized by the Quality Board itself, and this will be in early March, and the topic will be teaching and learning post-COVID, what lies ahead. And I encourage you to register for this event, and you can actually find this on the homepage of the Quality Board itself, which is qef.is. And it appears once you just click on that link. And the registrations are now open, and the program is being displayed there. So I think that will then bring us to the program itself. And as I said, then this is really in two parts. First, we have some formal presentations by 5 speakers, and we hope to be able to finish this by 2:45. Then we'll take a short break, and then after the break, we'll have a panel of 5 people and discussion. Of 4 people, sorry, not 5, and then a discussion. And I hope that you'll be able to pose some questions also related to the, of course, to the presentations in the first half. But anyway, so I think that's said, then I think we'll just move on. And our first, and we'll see, our first presenter is Elspeth Jones. We're very pleased to have her with us today. Can you please turn off your mics? Somebody, please. And Elspeth is an Emerita Professor of Internationalization in Higher Education at Leeds, Beckett University in the UK. And she has a background in linguistics with a focus on bilingual education. And in her long career in Leeds, she, among other things, led the Worldwide Horizons Drive, which saw internationalization as fundamental for all students and staff. So I think she is very able to answer this question of what we actually mean by this term, internationalization. So, Elspeth, please, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for that, Aslo. I just want to make sure that my screen is being shared. Okay. Sorry. So yes, thank you very much. As I say, it's very kind of you to invite me. I have had you've said a lot of really interesting things there, because hopefully I'm going to raise some of those in my talk today. So I'm going to try and talk a little bit about what we mean by internationalization, but I'm going to take it beyond that point, hopefully, and touch on some of the matters that you've raised already. So first of all, that the rationale for internationalization, I think, is very clear to most of us. But I think perhaps we imagine that internationalization is only to do with students who are going to work in other countries. But the interconnectedness of our world nowadays means that we need to prepare all of our students for the world as it is, and as it will rapidly become even more so. So we need to focus on our students at home, wherever they come from and whatever their backgrounds. As you've said already, it's thinking about those major global problems that we've got to deal with. People have come together to respond to the COVID-19 crisis, but then the United Nations have identified these sustainable development goals, that it will require all of us to come together to respond to these things. And we need that intercultural, international knowledge, skills and critical thinking to allow us to address these challenges. So as also already mentioned, the problem is that partly because the Erasmus scheme has been so successful across Europe, that we've really focused a lot on mobility. We focused very much on how to get our students abroad and welcome students coming in. This is really to the detriment of the whole process, to be honest, although many people have benefited from it. It creates all kinds of other problems. It's caused us to think that internationalization means having international students in the classroom as well. And in order to allow that to happen, to deliver our programs in English. Now, simply delivering a program in English isn't going to make it internationalized. It's simply, it could simply be a local curriculum, which happens to be delivered in another language. So none of these things in themselves will work in terms of internationalization. Now, I don't want to decry mobility. It's very, very important. And we know that there are many skills that are developed through international work study or volunteering in other countries. We've got employability skills, as you can see there, intercultural competence skills that are developed. And these are, I've given you an example of a chapter of mine there, but they come up over and over again. These are the kinds of things that are developed. But the problem is that mobility is, or study abroad is a privilege that only a relatively small number of our students can access. The estimates range from 2 to 5% of students around the world who are able to study as part of their program or for their whole program in another country. So we need to see mobility as adding value to an internationalized curriculum and not being the focus of our internationalization efforts. So another misconception is that internationalization is only to do with other countries. And this is really an important point in the context of the multicultural societies that we now live in. Partly it's to do with having the appropriate values, attitudes, relationships, knowledge, skills and perspectives which we need to live in our societies today. And this kind of values-based rationale for internationalization is exactly what also said at the beginning there. It's about having an appropriate mindset, about changing the mindsets of our students. It's not about simply moving bodies and being in different countries. So this kind of idea here is at the foundation of what my view of internationalization is, because it's simply helping our students to see things from perspectives of other people. And you may have heard of the term otherness, which came originally from sociology, the idea that we perceive other people as different from ourselves and that our way is normal and their way is different. Well, we need to get across the idea that there is no normal. Everybody has different versions of the world. Everybody views things differently. And in fact, you may be aware that the Council of Europe has taken this up in their model of intercultural dialogue. And they talk in particular about this competencies required for a democratic culture. And these are the basic values, attitudes, skills, knowledge and critical understanding, which they say are needed to exist in today's multicultural environment. We don't have time to go into this in great detail, but I just want to draw your attention to some fantastic documents that they've got online, the context and the model itself, but they also then talk about descriptors and give guidance on how to implement this approach. So if you're interested, there's some very good information online already. So coming back to the multicultural society, I think we can use this idea of diversity as a resource, that the idea of transformative or values-driven internationalization that I've been talking about is not dependent on international experiences, but the idea of constructive engagement with perceived cultural otherness of any kind. So anybody that we perceive as different from ourselves presents a learning opportunity. And in fact, rather than internationalization, I've argued that it's more like interculturalization that we need to be thinking about, because it can be domestic as well as international. And I'm going to talk now a little bit about how we can exploit these opportunities that we have within our own countries. So first of all, just to look at the idea of cultural diversity, think about the students, for example, the people that you know from different socioeconomic backgrounds, religions, languages, ethnicity, sexual orientation or gender identifications, all of these dimensions here. Then we've got, there may be refugees, asylum seekers, the idea of international students, which I'll mention in a second, is a little bit contested. But in some countries, you also have travelers, mature students we may have at university who come back after having family, for example, students who may be the first in their family to come to university, students with disabilities, those who may be working, people with caring responsibilities, and those who come from rural areas to study in a city. And in some countries, it's also the case that there are indigenous students from completely different backgrounds as well. And this version of transformative internationalization also has related concepts, including good citizenship, equality and equity, and so on, social justice, inclusivity, multiculturalism, and anti-discriminatory practice. These are all linked to the model that I'm talking about here. But it's very, very important that we remember intersectionality. So many of our students will have a combination of that kind of cultural diversity that you see on the left there. It could be that somebody comes from a rural part of the country. They may be the first in the family to attend. They could be disabled, and they could be working part-time. So the fact is that people don't just fit necessarily into one single category, and we need to think about the complexity of our students when we think around cultural diversity. So traditionally, we've talked about international and home students, or international and domestic students, but that's, if you think about the model that I've just presented there, it's very, very difficult to maintain that notion of a binary divide when we've got such complexity in the international student population, because by no means are all international students going to be having the same backgrounds either. They will be facing those ideas of, they will be from different diverse backgrounds as well, and including then the domestic students who will also have that diversity and indeed the intersections of diversity that I've referred to just now. So all this is very complex, and the problem is we use this term internationalization as though we all understand the same thing by it. And as I've tried to explain, we by no means think of the same things when we talk about internationalization. So internationalization at home in itself is a very important dimension. We need to be bringing the benefits of internationalization to all our students. And in the European Association for International Education, there is a special interest group, a community of practice in relation to internationalization at home. And I wrote a blog with Tanja Reifenrath, who's the current chair of that group, to try and talk about what we mean around internationalization at home. So bearing in mind that internationalization means interculturalization as well, I'll just talk a little bit about that. So the definition that seems to be well accepted is one that I wrote with Jos Belen in 2015. So this integration of international and intercultural dimensions needs to be purposeful. It won't happen on its own. So the teaching and learning process needs to bear all of this in mind. And it's the formal and the informal curriculum. So the formal curriculum being that which is assessed, but also the environment of the university, the informal curriculum provided by the university. Importantly, it's for all students, and it's within domestic learning environments. It's not simply necessarily within the university itself. And I'll go on to give some examples of that in a few minutes. So in our blog, Tanya and I came up with 10 key points which really identify what we mean by internationalization at home. And the blog goes into all of this in more detail if you're interested. But very importantly, it's around all students and bringing global perspectives into their program of study, whether or not they spend time abroad. But if you look at the sections that I've highlighted in black, it's around intercultural perspectives. It's thinking about purposefully using cultural diversity and engaging with cultural others in local society. So it's really important to bear all of these different dimensions in mind. So how do we think about taking this forward? Well, we need to recognize diversity in all its forms across the whole student body. I hope I've given some examples of that now. But we need to use this to design an inclusive curriculum with interculturalized learning outcomes or internationalized learning outcomes. And as part of the teaching and learning process, we need to provide a guided opportunity for our students to reflect on their experiences of cultural otherness within the framework that we design here, helping our students not simply to have those experiences which we create purposefully, as I mentioned, but to help them to reflect on what they've learned from those experiences.
Here's what I found.
Sorry. And within that, the role of the academic then is to ensure that the curriculum and the program includes those international, intercultural and global dimensions. We need to create challenging intercultural learning opportunities which are appropriate to the discipline, the students. We need to write relevant learning outcomes and assess them to ensure that they've been achieved. As I said, very importantly, this guided opportunity for reflection on experience of cultural otherness in its broadest sense is really important, and minimizing the notion of something that is normal, because nothing is normal, it's just different. And we need to be helping our students to be aware of those differences in all of our programs. So very briefly there, the intended learning outcomes, what students will know or be able to do that they couldn't do before. Think about the teaching and learning processes that will allow us to help students to reach those outcomes, and then the assessment for the students to show that, to demonstrate that they've achieved those outcomes. So this is, as I say, in the formal curriculum, the assessed curriculum, and I'm sure you have plenty of ideas of how to internationalize and interculturalize the informal curriculum in the institution. We don't really have time to go into that today. But I mentioned the idea of engaging with the wider community because going back to that definition that Jos and I wrote, it's about, we talked about different learning environments. We can think about how can our students work in community groups or in businesses or other kinds of organization to help develop those perspectives and to give them opportunities to learn from cultural others. I've given some examples there of what I mean by different community groups. All of the things that I've got on this slide are all things that I did when I was involved with delivering this kind of program in the university. That, as also mentioned, I was responsible for this idea of worldwide horizons. So we worked with businesses, we worked with different kinds of organizations and community groups, and helped students to experience, even if it was only on a volunteering basis, for example, working with in a shelter for drug addicts or for homeless people or for abused partners, for example. We supported students to have these kinds of experiences and help them to reflect on them, sometimes within the formal curriculum and sometimes outside it. So they're just a few examples. So I hope I've given you food for thought in some of these areas. I just wanted to briefly summarize what I'm trying to say here. We need to recognize and use cultural diversity in all its forms. And they're just a few versions of it. But I think it's important also to remember that using the term internationalization causes people to think about movement of bodies, when in fact that change of mindset is much more important than changing country, than going to a different country. And there are many examples of people going to other countries and not necessarily having their mindset changed. So it's up to us to help students to reflect on these experiences and help them to think differently, with that changed mindset. And finally, I think this idea of interculturalization, where we create the potential for students to question their own assumptions, acknowledge alternative viewpoints, cross-cultural boundaries, and think about their knowledge and understanding differently, respecting, valuing, and learning from diversity. And I think this is essential for living and learning in a changing society. Thinking about diversity in all its different forms, as I mentioned. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. And these are ways that you can contact me if you'd like to. And I'm very happy to answer questions at some point. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Elspeth. And you're a bit ahead of time, so we have plenty of time for questions and discussions. And from my chat, I don't see anyone raising questions, so please, I encourage you, this is a good opportunity to get some clarifications. And I think this is a new way of thinking for a lot of us. And because in this country, we have been focusing very much on international students. And we, of course, have also been very preoccupied with this problem, with this language problem. How do we actually deal with this? Because according to our language policy in this country, we are expected to carry out all our educational activities at the lower levels, at least in Icelandic. So this creates problems. But here we have questions from Skúli. Can you give us examples of universities or programs of success in this area?
Yeah, well, obviously I could talk about what we did at my university endlessly, but just in terms of some people who are doing interesting work, at the Hague University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, they're doing some really very, very interesting things and trying to, again, obviously they have a very diverse population, and they're having, they're really making an effort to try and bring this notion of intercultural opportunities to their student body and creating opportunities as part of the curriculum for them to go ahead with this approach to teaching and learning. And another one where they're doing very interesting work in terms of internationalizing the curriculum is the one that I mentioned, Tanja Reifenrath. She works at the University of Göttingen in Germany. So there are many examples in different parts of the world of programs delivering these kinds of opportunities to their students. It's quite unusual to see a whole university approach to this, and that's exactly what we were trying to do in terms of those kind of worldwide horizons that I mentioned at Leeds Beckett University back in the day. But it is unusual. It's not easy, and it's not easy to help people think differently, because as soon as you say internationalization, immediately it's about other countries or it's about other students, and it's quite hard to get people to think differently.
Thank you. Can you see your questions yourself, Elspeth?
I can, yes.
Yeah, maybe you should just take them.
So to what extent does a monodisciplinary undergraduate program structure hinder the question of assumptions? I don't think it's the monodisciplinarity that's the issue. Sometimes you find that student groups are not visibly diverse, shall we say. People say to me, well, I've got no international students. I've got no people from different cultural backgrounds. Well, the problem is we don't always try to find out the diversity of our students. We make assumptions. If we see a classroom full of, if you're in Iceland, for example, you might expect to see a classroom full of white faces. If there are no faces that are not white, you think we've got a mono culture in the classroom. But if you go back to the list that I was talking about, the different backgrounds of people, the diversity of their experiences, their different views of the world, regardless of whether everybody was born and brought up in the same country, they're going to have had different experiences. So we need to somehow explore those questions with our students. It's not about the discipline as such. I mean, each discipline will have a different approach to internationalizing the curriculum, yes, but we need to explore with our students and bring their perspectives into the classroom, is what I believe. So I hope I answered that one. Examples of what student movements could focus on to push for interculturalization. Yeah. So the in some of the, obviously this has been a very brief introduction here, but I think student movements have got an enormous amount to offer. You may be familiar with the European Student Network. They've got in fact, they've got a seminar coming up soon about the kinds of skills that are developed. Clearly, the Erasmus dimension is very, very important for them. But in fact, other student movements have taken different approaches and focused more on the multiculturalism within their communities. I remember the National Union of Students in Scotland did some really interesting work a while back around diversity within the student population and trying to be inclusive. I should have also said, by the way, when answering the question about universities that have done this really successfully, I immediately leapt to the idea of a university, but actually some really interesting work going on in community colleges in North America as well. And in one that I'm very familiar with is Centennial College in Toronto in Canada. And they've got just this amazing approach to inclusivity in the student body and helping people to have these kinds of perspectives and take this sort of approach. And I would really recommend you to have a look at the website at Centennial College in Canada, because they've done some really interesting work there. And their student bodies are really pushing for this kind of approach as well.
Yes, thank you. Are there some one more question maybe?
Was there? Sorry,
no.
I think I can't see any more.
No, there aren't any more. I was just saying if somebody wants to post a final
I see. Beth Rogers has put. She's mentioned about the Hague University in one of the videos on my YouTube channel. That's true. We've talked. I talked about that in particular with Eva Haug on my YouTube channel. She talks about collaborative online international intercultural learning and how they do that there as well. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, here comes the final question.
The biggest articles to
you mean obstacles, as you think?
Obstacles.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Obstacles. Well, there are so many obstacles. I think the greatest. Let's turn it around. Let's talk about the greatest opportunity, I think, because the opportunity, I think, is for the teaching staff. The teaching staff, the academics, are absolutely crucial to all of this. They are fundamental to the way we internationalize and interculturalize curricula, how we make an inclusive environment in the classroom, how we project these opportunities to students and try to create this mindset. So the biggest opportunity, shall we say, I think is in the academics who can start to bring this forward, and the supportive environment that would be needed in that context.
Yes, thank you. Then I think we'll just stop here. Elspeth, thank you very much for this very thought-provoking presentation. I think people have now got a lot of stuff to think about and see how this applies to our own reality here in this country, at least. And we'll then move on to the next presentation. And this is given by Harpa Arnarsdóttir, who is has been a policy officer at the European Commission within education, youth, sport, and culture. And there, in that capacity, she has been actually involved in bringing forward this European Universities Initiative. And she is actually, this is maybe her last day of work there, or tomorrow. And after the weekend, she'll become an employee at the University of Iceland, actually collaborating with us on this new Aurora Universities Alliance that the University of Iceland is now a part of. So, and she's going to be talking about this cooperation across borders, languages, and disciplines from this European Universities perspective. So, Harpa, please take the floor.
Yes, thank you so much, Áslaug. I'm going to share my screen now. Yeah, I have difficulty talking and setting up my screen at the same time, but it should be working now. So pleasure to be with you here today. And so my topic will focus, or my presentation will focus on the European universities. I want to start by saying I very much liked what you said, Áslaug, in the beginning, that in terms of internationalization, we have been very much focused on research in the past decades, and perhaps more focus should be placed on also learning and teaching and education in that context. So I'm very happy to say that this is precisely one of the core objectives of the European Universities Initiative. And at the same time, when I was listening to you, Elspeth, I mean, I was nodding along throughout your entire presentation, because this is also exactly what the European Universities Initiative is about. It's about finding ways to have meaningful internationalization to really boost quality and relevance of our higher education systems and ensure that our graduates are really equipped with the skills that they need to thrive in a changing society. But I will go into more details on that. And maybe before I start, I also wanted to say that the title of this webinar is essentially a question: whether internationalization is a driver for quality in higher education. And I want to start by answering that question, that from my perspective, the answer is absolutely yes. It is definitely a driver for quality in higher education, not the only one, but certainly an important one. And I think if we take a step back and we look at internationalization more holistically and strategically within our communities, we can certainly use it to drive even more the quality of our higher education systems. And well, the higher education ministers in Europe do agree. So this includes also the Icelandic minister. So recently, on November 19th, 2020, the higher education ministers came together in Italy and they signed a new communication on the Bologna process. And here they were reinforcing their commitment to working together to achieve closer and deeper cooperation between universities. And there they stated this, what you see on the screen, that cooperation and mobility connect our systems and foster the development of intercultural and linguistic competences, broader knowledge and understanding of our world. Direct contacts and synergies among our diverse cultures and higher education systems through mobility of staff and students contribute to the excellence and relevance of higher education, making it attractive and competitive on the global scale. Now, of course, this is nothing new. I think we've known for a long time that international cooperation in higher education has a lot of value. And just for an example, I mean, we're talking about Erasmus+, and of course, the European Universities Initiative is funded by the Erasmus+ program. And Iceland has been participating in Erasmus+ since 1992. Sending out students and then later on trainees to Europe, also outside the borders of Europe, as well as sending and receiving staff and students. And if we take a look at the last few years, we can see that there has been a persistent trend in Iceland where there is a bit of an imbalance. We have a high volume of incoming students, A bit less a number of outgoing students. Of course, this is just in the context of Erasmus+. There are, of course, much more exchanges to and from Iceland beyond Erasmus+. But we can see that this is a trend that has persisted throughout the last few years, at least. Now, in terms of what does all of this mean? What is the concrete benefit for students? Well, actually, Elspeth already touched upon many of these things. I mean, there is a range of transversal skills that are enhanced through participation in mobility. And of course, there's a body of research out there that has looked into this topic, but the points that you see here on the slide, these come from a recent impact studies that we carried out at the Commission, where we were comparing students that had been abroad as part of their studies, both in Erasmus+ and also through other programs, and graduates that had not been mobile through their studies. And we found significant differences between those that had been mobile and those that really hadn't had as much international exposure during their studies. So I think that there is no question that being mobile adds a lot of personal benefits for you. But we also have to think about the numerous benefits for the local students as well, because as we said, you know, incoming students and having diverse campuses and a diverse higher education community, that also has a huge impact on teaching and learning in our own classrooms. So here, I just wanted to give like a personal story here. I remember one of the classes when I was a student that I remember absolutely the most. I will never forget this experience. I was studying European integration with a German professor, and I was studying with a Chinese student, and we had to work together on a project where we were talking about European integration and European values. And this was just sort of a perfect storm of seeing a subject from many different perspectives, and an exercise in critical thinking and taking a look at certain, you know, attitudes and values that we maybe take for granted and seeing them from a completely different historical and cultural perspective. And this classroom really was what boosted my motivation to, you know, continue studying things related to European cooperation. And I think that the skills that I also gained sort of by accident, just by the context of this project that I had to work on. I mean, I've always had these skills then in terms of intercultural understanding and communication and even negotiation skills, because we came from such rapidly different backgrounds. So I think that this is something that we have to keep in mind. Sometimes we talk about things more in terms of theory and statistics, but behind all of these numbers are really real stories about life-changing experiences that help us as individuals, but also those around us, those that have had the option of going abroad, to, you know, rediscover themselves and discover their own strengths and weaknesses, and to find new insights into topics and into their career choices or career ambitions. So I also just have to mention that it's not just the students, it's also the staff that are taking part in these activities, and this has a huge impact on them as well. So in these studies as well, we found that 80% of those that had been abroad, they said that it had spurred on some kind of innovative teaching practices being embedded into the curricula and their faculties. And also those that had been abroad, they were more open to involving staff from, you know, companies, businesses, or the wider community in their courses. They see the added value of, you know, stronger community engagement when teaching their students and teaching a course. And then, of course, we are also funding projects or cooperation projects between universities, and these also, you know, spur on innovation. And you can see there that a nearly third of the projects that we were taking a look at, they had actually resulted in some kind of startups or spin-off enterprises. So there is a lot of added value in international cooperation as it is today. But I think now it's time to also take a step back and realize that we are in a world of rapid societal changes and challenges. And most of them are highly complex challenges that go across disciplines, that go across borders, cultures, and languages. Solving our biggest global challenges today really require international cooperation. And that means that if we want our graduates to be active, engaged citizens that are able to actively contribute to solving these societal challenges, we perhaps need to take a step back and rethink a little bit how we prepare them for their future. So here you see some of these main priorities that the Commission has now, and these are embedded in the future funding program. So, you know, the recovery of the pandemic, of course, became a top priority. Beyond that, the twin transitions, if you will, the green transition and the digital transition that Europe is going through is, of course, of vital importance in all of the funding programs. And then social inclusion. So really ensuring that we are open and we give, you know, equal and equitable opportunities to our citizens, and that we enhance social cohesion and cultural understanding. So, of course, this is being recognized by the Commission that these are these broad, big societal challenges, and that education really is one of the top tools to address these societal challenges. So the European education area is just sort of an umbrella term for a number of initiatives that the Commission is working on to really help educational systems fulfill their fundamental missions in these changing times. And among those initiatives is the European Universities Initiative. So in terms of transformation of European higher education, there are a number of things that we want to see happen in the near future. So in terms of the content and how higher education institutions operate in society, we really want to place them at the center of the knowledge square. So some of you may be familiar with the term knowledge triangle, but here we broaden it up a little bit. So we talk about education, research, innovation, and service to society. And like I said before, these are such huge, complex global challenges that really addressing them requires closer and deeper cooperation across borders and cultures. So between societies in general, but also between higher education institutions, because no single institution can deliver on all of this alone. And this is also about embedding innovative learning and teaching practices into curricula that are, you know, addressing these societal challenges. And all of this should contribute to the increased quality, relevance, and competitiveness of European higher education. And here you see, you know, below all of these points, we put more mobility and automatic recognition. Now today, it's true that it's a small portion of our students that have the opportunity to be mobile during their studies. So within this transformation of higher education and within the European Universities Initiative, one of the key things that we're trying to achieve is to have more embedded and structured mobility activities that reach at least 50% of the student population, and those that are not able to go abroad physically themselves would have some kind of other opportunities to have a strong international dimension also in their education. And of course, you know, we need to ensure that we have proper recognition procedures for all of that. And also, if we're talking about transforming higher education and having more transnational activities embedded in curriculum, that also requires quality assurance mechanisms that today, as far as I know, don't exist. So all of this is part of a very ambitious, broad agenda. And I think we can say here we're talking about, you know, 10 to 20 years into the future. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. So how do we get there? Well, from the Commission perspective, this is a co-creation process. And what we are going to do in the next year is create the sort of transformation agenda for higher education. And the European Universities Initiative really is the test bed because, like I said, it's co-creation. So we want to see bottom-up strategies, universities coming together, taking a look at these big, broad societal challenges, and coming up with a joint long-term shared vision of how they can work together to achieve all of these objectives. So that means that the European universities are really the pioneers that are creating new models of cooperating between themselves, but then also within each institution. So I think the European universities will have actually a huge impact on how this transformation agenda will be set up and really help us shape the universities of the future. So for now, we have had 2 pilot calls, one in 2019 and one in 2020. And now we funded 41 alliances with more than 280 higher education institutions across Europe involved. And now they have received funds to really set up governance structures and new strategies and pilots to test their vision and test their new models of cooperation. And then based on the results of this pilot, this will feed into how this initiative will continue in the future. So I think here I've said already, I think all of these things, but maybe one thing to consider is that if we think about COVID-19, for example, and what Áslaug said in the beginning, that we always take it for granted that in terms of research, it makes sense to pull together our knowledge and our resources to find solutions. And what better example is there than coming up with a vaccine within a year to a totally new disease that would never have happened if we hadn't had this level of cooperation across borders. But I think we have to also think about this in terms of our education systems, and especially in a small country like Iceland, where I mean, the pool of experts in any given subject area must be a bit limited compared to larger countries. So for us, it is essential that we really use internationalization to strengthen our institutions and to help our students. And then thinking about these big societal challenges like COVID-19, when you address these, you don't only address them through research, you also address them through health science and public communication and public policies, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why also equipping students with the ability to work across disciplines, languages and cultures is so important. So I mentioned earlier that, and Áslaug, thank you, you mentioned this as well, and you play a key role in this project, of course, that the University of Iceland is a member of one of these European university alliances. And it is true that as of tomorrow, it's my last day working for the Commission, and on Monday I will join the University of Iceland, and I will be working as a project manager for this European University Alliance. So I hope you don't put me on the spot and ask me too many detailed questions, because technically I haven't started yet. But I just want to say that this is a huge opportunity for Iceland and Icelandic universities. So this alliance is really developing all of these things that I think Elspeth also was mentioning earlier. So putting together really a competence framework. What are the skills that we really need to address and ensure that our students have? And how do we implement, service learning and more engagement with society to foster these skills? And how can we also boost mobility and ensure that every student has an opportunity to have internationalization and high quality internationalization as part of their curricula? These are the kinds of questions that the Aurora Alliance, for example, is tackling together with its partners. And then we will also be working on this within the University of Iceland to see how do we make the most of this opportunity, and how do we use our lessons learned from these pilots to boost quality and mobility within the University of Iceland. But I also want to say very briefly that the new Erasmus Plus program is also supporting this vision. So even though you're a higher education institution that is not involved in a European University Alliance, it doesn't mean that you are not able to go on this same journey within your own institutions. And actually, the Erasmus Plus program has embedded a lot of opportunities for universities to experiment with this and perhaps learn from other European university alliances, see what they are testing and trying out, take what you want to try for yourself, and then you can use the new Erasmus Plus program to fund some of these similar activities. So just to point out that the new program will have things like blended mobility and blended intensive programs. So here the objective is to develop innovative learning and teaching practices within curricula that also have physical mobility and then online international cooperation embedded into the curriculum. So collaborative online international learning, or COIL, for example, where it's really meaningful online cooperation and something that students can benefit from also regardless of whether they are mobile or not. So these are the kinds of things that many of the European university alliances are developing, and then also other universities can try this out for themselves. There will also be, more short-term and flexible doctoral mobility opportunities within the new program, and this, of course, can have a lot of added value in terms of internationalization. And up until now, within the Erasmus Plus program, there has been a limited amount of options for having international mobility. So one of the things the new program will do is to have sort of an international opening, where each university will have the option to spend a portion of their funds to also send students and staff outside of Europe without having to go through an additional application process. And then also there's, of course, a wide range of cooperation opportunities within the program, and more cooperation opportunities than the predecessor has. And here the policy priorities are very similar to the ones that the European universities have, of course. So this is also an excellent opportunity for all Icelandic universities to take a look at what's happening in this bigger context, to see what they would want to do to really use internationalization as a driver for quality and relevance of their courses in their institutions, and to strategically use the new Erasmus Plus program that has these new opportunities embedded in them by no coincidence to achieve your own objectives. So here is just also a few resources that I have. So I think you will get the slides after my presentation. And that's it for me.
Well, thank you very much, Harpa. Time is almost up. So if there's maybe one very quick question to Harpa, then we can take that. Here's some very long comments. Harpa, can you maybe glance through the one from Toby?
So I think I see some questions here that have to do with inclusion, and there's also some institutional roadblocks. So, well, I have to read through these.
Yeah, maybe you can just contemplate these and we can come back to it.
Yeah, they're quite extensive, but I think yes. I want to say as well, there's also this, the new program has a very strong inclusion dimension in it, where we're trying to tackle barriers and obstacles to mobility. And there is, we're going to have Jafnréttisdagar, equality days, at the University of Iceland next week. And on Tuesday, we will have a special session about the new Erasmus Plus program and what we want to do to ensure that every student has the opportunity to be mobile in their studies if they're interested, and to remove these barriers within perhaps the University of Iceland, but also in Iceland. So maybe that would be an excellent place for you to, those that are listening today, to join and go deeper into this specific topic.
Thank you very much. I think we'll move on. So our next presentation is now on internationalization at home, support for a multicultural learning community. And this is being presented by Brynja Halldórsdóttir, who is an assistant professor at the School of Education here at the University of Iceland. So Brynja, you can take the floor now.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. I have a short slideshow to share. Hang on. Oops. Starting at the end, apparently. Good afternoon. So my name is Brynja Halldórsdóttir, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Iceland in the School of Education. And together with my colleague Susan Gulliver, who is here attending the session with us today, we have been doing some research around internationalization in higher education here at the University of Iceland. And we've done it especially from the perspective of looking at this program that she and I work in and run together. And so what we've done in the past few years is look at, to begin with, we began by looking at sort of how the University of Iceland's strategic plans reflected this idea and this concept of internationalization. And then in concert with that, we began to have discussions with students from our program to understand better how this was impacting or how this was being carried out within the university itself. And what we find is that these sort of conservative conceptualizations of internationalization, so these issues that Elspeth was talking about earlier today, of that when we mention the word internationalization, we think of it as sending people away or receiving people from away to us to engage in this educational conversation. And what we found in the research that we've been looking at is that this perspective tends to exclude this idea of internationalization at home, and then leads to changing or impacting students' right to quality higher education. And so what we suggest is to utilize programs such as our program to better examine how internationalization at home can be engaged with in universities, especially here in the Icelandic context. To start with, I want to clarify, oh, I'm sorry, my dog decided to bark. The Department of International Studies in Education we call it DIS, is a program that was started, pardon me.
Hundurinn tiltur.
I am so sorry. The Department of International Studies started as a program in 2018 to respond to a changing demographic in Iceland, and started to work with students who didn't feel comfortable with learning and studying in an Icelandic language environment. So this program is a BA and master's level program that is taught exclusively in English. And then a large portion of the students then also take courses outside of our department in order to engage with the wider university community. I don't think that I really need to go too deeply into the concepts of internationalization, because I think that Elspeth did a very good job of explaining the differences sort of between the internationalization at home and internationalization abroad. So I think I'll just move on to some of our stories and some of our experiences with these students that we've talked about. When we began our analysis, what we did is we took the preceding 3 strategic plans and analyzed how the discourse and how the language of internationalization was used within these strategic plans. And for the first 2 strategic plans, the focus was on attracting more doctoral and graduate students from in an international capacity. So bringing students here. The other focus was on exchange. And finally, there was a focus on the international rankings. So where we were registering within, say, Times Higher Education measurements and tools, and then also how to develop the international and how to work with the international office which provides international student and scholar services. It's not until the most recent strategic plan that multiculturalism and diversity are discussed as part of a strategic focus within the University of Iceland. And along with that came discussions around interventions. And so one of the things that we found was really interesting is how the Times, for example, ranks these aspects in terms of internationalization and what is used to measure the levels of internationalization in higher education. And it's often focused around student and staff and research mobility, and not around what happens internally to the university and internally to the institutions. So what we found as we started talking to the students about their experiences within the university was that there were underlying normalized exclusionary and discriminatory practices where students would go and ask for services, and then when they got there, their degree programs might not be recognized, or their higher education experiences, they struggled to find recognition and get access to programs that they wanted to study in or wanted to work within. As Batso indicates here, when she spoke to the international office, that she found it very difficult to find a way to communicate her university experience in such a way that she could get the advice that she was looking for to attend a university program. And one of the things that we found that was very interesting in the data that we have collected was that some of the students had joined our program explicitly because they wanted to get a higher education degree, but they weren't necessarily interested in it from an education perspective. Because we teach in a program that is international education, our focus is on education. And so some of the students attended because they understood that it's important to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and that the value or the focus of having an Icelandic degree gave them certain currency within society, and so they joined the program, and because it was one of the few options at the University of Iceland that is exclusively in English. In fact, we are aside from the English language and literature program, we are the only program that teaches at the bachelor level in English exclusively. So some of the students were there for the degree program seeking, not specifically because this was their passion or this was the field that they wanted to enter into. They also saw this as I mentioned before, this is another way for social mobility that they had experienced as immigrants to the country who were settled here, that they wanted to move upward in their work environments and not be continue to be placed in, as Tabi notes, cooking and cleaning jobs. And several of them had been looking for programs for years, and then happened upon this program as a program that they could engage in English. One of the things that stood out a great deal was that several of the students reported that they felt that within the courses that they took, that there was a distinct difference between how they were perceived and what kind of grades and feedback they were getting as opposed to local Icelandic students. They noticed this in the conversation between students, that there was a distinct difference or discriminatory practices that they were experiencing. And I think one of the things that is interesting about this is, as faculty, sometimes we forget that the students are talking to each other. They're talking to each other about the courses that they want to take, about the programs that they're interested in. So this informal part of the education system is equally as important as the courses that they take, that the offices that they go and seek help from. So how we present ourselves from the formal perspective then trickles down into this informal area, or the aformal part where the students are interacting with each other. And again, as both Tabe and TK note, that the host country never loses. And another aspect that students report on frequently is that the cultural differences, the sociocultural differences within their home countries or their home environments and here, and the engagement, the sort of social engagement, was another aspect that students found difficult to traverse, that as TK is noting here, when he would run into classmates in his home university, there was a time to talk, a time to have a chat and say hello, whereas when he ran into colleagues or students from his experiences here in Iceland, that opportunity didn't quite seem to provide itself, that it was that he felt that he was being ignored. Which is, again, focuses on this sort of concept that it's not always just the bringing in of the diversity that we have to do. It's also that at the institutional level, we have to open ourselves up to that diversity and make that a diversity as a part of the experience, so that this isn't, just for those who are other or different from us, but that actually that we're all learning from this experience, that this is a co-created experience, that internationalization, whether it's abroad or at home, is a co-created experience that we all learn and benefit from. And as they talked about it too, is that and in some of the research on diversity, and for example, in the States, there's this tendency for people to sit together, to work together, because they had this familiar cultural experience to work together. And that created, within our program, that created a diverse background where students work together to help each other to develop a new learning context and new learning spaces for themselves in the program, which they didn't necessarily experience in all of the classes that they sought across the university. This, our research, these quotes, this discussion, we've published a couple of articles, but this is also supported by research that I've done with another colleague, that Arnarsdóttir and Halldórsdóttir have done over the past few years, some recent research and a doctoral thesis that was done around internationalization, and that was looking at 3 institutions of higher education, as well as some master's students who have conducted similar research. And the findings have all been the same, in that it's very interesting that the institution is responding and it is making changes, and they do exist. But what we're really seeing is that understanding this as a microcosm of a socially just internationalization process is a growing process that takes time to understand. And what it needs is to focus on these intercultural dimensions within the University of Iceland, is to utilize, as Elspeth was talking about before, community resources, but also the internal resources to the universities. The student populations that are here, they are diverse, they are growing, and it's these aspects of the opportunity to have these cross-cultural experiences in the classroom or outside of the classroom are equally important. And in order to do that, some of the things that we have to think about is this experimental and flexible curriculum, as well as looking at it from an interdisciplinary international perspective. And some of the things here, there are tools within the University of Iceland and within other universities that can be used here. We have the equality plan, we have a diversity teaching practice list that's produced by the Center for Teaching and Learning here at the university. And these are all references that faculty can use to create these more international, intercultural experiences within the classroom. There are programs that we offer that are online that you can learn a little bit more about intercultural experiences. So there are pieces that are happening here that show and indicate that these changes are coming, but the students are still experiencing these sort of exclusionary practices. And it's important to sort of note them, not shy away from them, and address them and engage the students in that conversation with how to address them, and through these diverse pedagogical responses, as well as this focus on this academic and social well-being. It was very clear in the data that we collected that, in the classroom, we can focus on the academic well-being of students, and we can engage with them through office hours and through a variety of different other mechanisms. But it's also very important for them to have and engage in a social experience where they are included within the institution of higher education in diverse ways, which is an interesting proposition in Iceland, where the diversity of the student body in terms of age and where they're from has an impact on how cross-cultural friendships are made and such things. So these are all things that we have to keep in mind as we're working to develop this idea of internationalization at home. And this led us to think about a couple of questions that maybe I'd like everyone to take away as they leave for today is, what sort of institution should universities here in Iceland aspire to, and why? What roles should we be playing? And I really particularly liked Elspeth's example of this community involvement and how we can engage in the wider community. In Iceland, the increase in the diverse population over the past 10 years has been significant. We went from, having in the 2000s, 2% of the population being non-Icelandic speaking immigrants, to now the diversity is up to 15%, including first, second generation immigrants who are residing here and participating in the schools and in higher education and in Icelandic society in general. And we need to think about very carefully and look at whom we are including and whom we are excluding, and why and how it's happening. And are we really taking care of the knowledge that we're responsible for? Are we making sure that all of the research on diversity, all of the research on equity is getting out there, it's being communicated, and it's being utilized in such a way that it improves the social justice within society and within the universities? And are we offering appropriate and taking proper care of students that we're responsible, all the students that we're responsible for? What changes can we make in that area to improve the caretaking that we're doing? And these are just some references. I know the text is very small, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to share them with you afterward.
Well, thank you very much, Brynja, for this interesting presentation. The time is running as always, but there is a question here from was a question from Christian at the Agricultural University. Are there currently any plans to establish more English taught bachelor programs in Iceland? And well, this is an open question to everybody, not really to you, Brynja, but maybe you can maybe answer it.
One of the problems, one of the things that we've run into is, like, for the example, the University of Iceland, is one of the guardians of the Icelandic language, and I don't mean that in a negative sense in any way, shape, or form. It's the home to Arnarsdóttir and stuff like that. So there is a language policy at the University of Iceland, and one of the key pieces to the language policy is that all BA programs be taught in Icelandic, and the exception was made for this program, and that's in the language policy. I haven't heard about that. There's an intention to increase English language courses or programs at the University of Iceland, but I know that in the conversations around the recent development of the new strategic plan, there have been calls for greater focus on this aspect to make the University of Iceland more inclusive, more accessible to a wider group of people within society. I don't, to answer Zelia's question about what the problem would be with teaching courses in English or programs in English, I don't see them see it as a problem. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that because Icelandic is such a small language community, that the importance of that sort of the loss of the language is a bit of a concern, although there is research that argues that we may be overly concerned about it. However, there have been significant changes within the language in the past few years, if you keep up on some of the research around Icelandic as a language. And so it's really a matter of both offering courses in Icelandic, but also making the university a place where, if you want to study whatever you want to study, that we find ways that you can do that either through English language or through providing support for students who need it in Icelandic. And this isn't just doesn't just refer to students of immigrant background. This refers to all kinds of students, first generation. The changes in the population that are coming into the universities in Iceland has changed in the last 30, 40 years. So the way that we teach as academics, the way that we work as academics also has to change to receive these changing demographic groups, which is much broader than just talking about, say, immigrant students.
Thank you. I think we'll stop here. And then thank you very much again, Brynja, for this presentation. Thank you.
And sorry about the dog.
It's okay. And I think we'll then move on. And the next in the podium is Anna Grönlund, and she comes from the University in Jyväskylä in Finland. And she is going to talk about international bench learning, a case study from Finland. So the floor is yours, Anna.
Thank you, Aslaug. I will try to share my screen. And I'm assuming you can see it now. Let me just put it in presentation mode. There we go. So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you just briefly about a bench learning experience that we had with our colleagues from Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam a couple of years ago. I'm using the title boosting development or boosting quality work really through bench learning. And our theme in our project was the continuous development of teaching competencies. So I will not be directly addressing internationalization per se, but granted this wasn't a project that we did with an international partner, so there is that international element to this experience, and maybe there's some takeaways for you as well. Just a brief outline of my presentation and what I'm going to be talking about. I thought that first we would look at the context of quality assurance of higher education institutions here in Finland, and briefly look at the Finnish Education Evaluation Center, or FINEG's, guidelines for bench learning. And then we will dive deeper into the JYU VU Amsterdam bench learning project that we carried out a couple of years ago. And finally, some lessons learned from my colleagues here in Jyväskylä and also in Amsterdam. So first, about the context of quality assurance of institutions here in Finland. It's actually fairly straightforward, I would say. The Universities Act, which is the law governing Finnish universities, states that universities must participate in external evaluation of their activities and quality systems, and these evaluation results will be public. Most universities in Finland use the services of FINEG for these external audits, and the FINEG quality label is valid for 6 years, which means that most Finnish universities run this 6-year external quality assurance audit cycle. The purposes of the FINEG audit is to evaluate whether the quality work or the quality system in the institution meets the European quality assurance standards or the ESGs. Also to assess whether the quality system produces relevant information for the implementation of the institutional strategy at that particular institution, and for continuous development of activities. The purpose is also to encourage internationalization, experimenting, and creativeness, which I find really inspiring, and to increase open and transparent quality work at Finnish institutions and also among Finnish institutions. Some of the central premises of the latest FINIC audit model for 2018-2024 are competence-based, student-centered, and research-based approach in education, autonomy of institutions to develop their quality systems according to their own needs and goals, and also impact of the institution's activities. I've linked the FINIC audit model here in my presentation, which you will receive afterwards, so that you can find out more about the Finnish model if you're interested. And there's plenty of material also in English, so it should be accessible to everyone. The bench learning is really a new feature in the FINIC audit model for this round. And of course, Finnish institutions, just like any other European institutions, have been involved and engaged in different kinds of bench learning activities before with domestic and international partners. But in terms of this quality assurance or quality audit model, this is the first time that it's been incorporated into this, this model. And FINIC set some guidelines in its booklet or its sort of guideline booklet on the model for institutions wishing to engage in bench learning. And the purpose of bench learning, according to FINIC, is to learn from good practices of another organization, which for me seems self-evident. This is kind of the basic thing that comes to mind when you think about benchmarking or bench learning. All the higher education institutions are free to choose the partner that they want to carry out this bench learning project with. It can be a higher education institution, but it can also be a different type of organization. It could be a company, or it could be a third sector organization, or possibly even a government organization, if that seems relevant, thinking of the topic or theme that the particular institution wants to look at in that bench learning activity. The key really is to have a clear planning and implementation process for the bench learning activity, and to also have a plan for implementing and applying the outcomes of the activity into the institution's roadmap for future. So the guidelines from FINIC are really relatively relaxed or loose. And we, as institutions, have quite a bit of freedom to choose the partners that we want to partner with for bench learning, and to kind of choose our own path in these types of projects if this is something that we want to do, sort of as part of the quality assurance cycle. As for our institution at Jyväskylä, we had been collaborating with Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam before in an EUA learning and teaching initiative thematic peer group that was focusing on the continuous development of teaching competencies. And as that process of the EUA group was going on, and I happened to mention this at the office to my colleague who is the institutional quality manager at our institution, she immediately picked it up and said that, you know, this might be something that maybe we could work on a bit more if there's interest between you and VU colleagues to maybe further collaboration after this EUA group. We could maybe turn this into a bench learning project and use it towards our kind of preparing for the upcoming audit with FINIC. And we had a discussion at our institution with the Vice Rector for Education and our Education Council, whether this would be something that we would like to engage in, and they seem to agree that this might be a good idea. So we took it up with our Amsterdam colleagues, and they seem to agree, and they've noticed the same thing, that there were certain similarities and similar challenges, maybe as similar approaches to developing learning and teaching at our institution. So there was that kind of organic match between our two institutions. And we decided that we would continue with the same theme that we had in the EUA group, which was the continuous development of teaching competencies. But we kind of felt that to facilitate a more kind of structured process in our bench learning activity, we would work out sub-themes for this. And we came up with these 4. So first, teachers' professional development frameworks, which was something that we felt was a joint or shared challenge for both of our institutions. Secondly, the recognition of pedagogical merits in teachers' career models, which is kind of linked to the first one. And thirdly, recognize change forces influencing development of teaching competences, which is something that is sort of connected to the overall learning and teaching development at institutions in general. And fourth, the organizational culture and informal networks fostering continuous development of teaching competence is kind of realizing that it doesn't all happen very formally through formal education or formal professional development, but also in informal networks. And we decided that we should maybe also agree on a joint kind of overall objective for the bench learning activity, and kind of reflecting on the FINIC guidelines. We decided that our objective would be just to share information, share knowledge and functional practice to support the systemic and strategic decision making in both institutions. In addition to this, both institutions, of course, also had their own kind of maybe more institution specific objectives or ideas about what the outcomes could be from this kind of activity and what the benefits might be for us. For us at JYU, there's the obvious thing of the upcoming audit, which happened last year, and we passed successfully. But of course, it was also linked to the more the kind of strategic development of education, strategic development of learning and teaching in general, and of course, the professional development frameworks for teachers, which is part of our strategic development program for education in this season. And if we look at the kind of the basic process and the elements of that process of the bench learning activity that we carried out, it spans across the academic year 2018-2019. We finished the EUA thematic group in spring 2018, and kind of over the summer 2018 worked on kind of basic ideas about what this bench learning activity would look like for us. And we're able to kick off the process in September 2018 and start working on a more detailed project plan. We carried out data collection in both institutions. We also carried out self-evaluations in both institutions and used the outcomes of these data collection and self-evaluations to work on material that we then utilized during our first site visit, which was the site visit from our part from Jyväskylä to Amsterdam. And after that site visit, we collected interim results individually in both institutions and then brought them together and planned for a second site visit, which took place here in Jyväskylä with the Amsterdam colleagues arriving here. And after that, again, started sort of working together towards the final results of the benchmarking and towards reporting of the project. And at JYU, as I mentioned, that we both of our institutions had sort of institutionally specific objectives and kind of connections to this project. At JYU, this meant that the outcomes of this bench learning experience were used and included in the implementation plan of the strategic development program of education. And it was also, or the outcomes were also used and included together with the project description in the audit materials for FINIC for the audit that happened in December 2020 last year. So this is just a brief overview of how we carried the whole thing through. And finally, maybe some lessons learned from our project. When we thought about kind of going back and kind of throwing back to our experience with our colleagues here at JYU and also with the Amsterdam colleagues, and we thought about kind of the success factors for us. For us, it was very important that we had an institutional match. And it definitely made it very easy for us to kind of organically start this process because we knew each other from before through the EUA project and from other sorts of collaborations as well. So choosing the right partner for this purpose was really easy for us. And we kind of, in some sense, you might say that we were lucky and the timing was really right for us. We also felt that it was really important for us to kind of define the joint objectives and also the institutional or institution-specific objectives, because those don't necessarily always match, but it's still important to recognize them and make a note of them so that maybe the activity can then serve multiple purposes. And this idea is kind of linked to the maximizing outcomes idea, that if you have strategic connection to the objectives that you're setting for this type of activity, it makes the implementation of the outcomes easier. And this is definitely something that we felt that our timing at JYU was really spot on for this type of activity. We had just finished a massive strategy work and just launched our new strategy with the including the development program for education, which had these specific development goals for continuous development of teaching competencies and boosting sort of teachers' career framework at our university. So there was already that strategic connection to the theme of our bench learning activity. We also felt that building a very diverse and multi-professional institutional bench learning team was important. From our side, our team included our Vice Rector for Education, our Quality Manager, people from Educational Research Center, teaching and learning experts, student representation, higher education policy experts. So it was really a really diverse and multi-professional team, and people looking at the same phenomenon from different perspectives, and together with our colleagues from VU made it a really good combo for conversations. We also wanted to avoid administrative chaos. So the project planning was very lean, and we wanted to kind of stay away from the European project type of administrative burden. And since this connection with the VU colleagues already existed from before, it felt kind of natural and organic and lean to enter this type of project. But it didn't mean that we didn't have a project plan or documentation, which is something that I also want to mention was really important for us, to be able to then kind of document and report on the process of this bench learning as well, and not just the outcomes. So this was our journey with VU, and I'd be very happy to take any questions that you might have at this point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Anna. This was very good. A slightly different perspective from the other presentations.
Yes.
But a question from Skúli: how would you generally shortly define the concepts of benchmarking and/or bench learning?
Initially, I do have to say that we were using the term benchmarking. I think it's maybe a bit more familiar from the kind of business and economics and organizational theories. And bench learning is a term that was introduced to us, at least, by FINIC. And that's the term that FINIC uses. So we kind of just moved over to using bench learning. For me, there's probably a theoretical difference between the two terms, but for me, it's kind of benchmarking. Maybe I think bench learning is maybe a bit more reciprocal. So it's a two-way street, more than just benchmarking, which could be, for me at least, it sounds a bit more like just comparing to someone outside your organization, but maybe there isn't that kind of exchange of ideas that much. So but there's probably a lot of theory on this as well, and someone else has a better definition for these words.
Yes, well, there are a couple more questions with very short answers, because we really need to move on. Some people have a chance to stand up and have a short break before the panel starts.
Someone is asking, Toby is asking if there are any financial incentives to encourage internationalization, experimentation, and creativeness called by FINIC. Not specifically for FINIC purposes or for the audit purposes, but of course for internationalization, there are institutional incentives, plenty of them at Finnish institutions. But in terms of it depends. Well, there's financial support for carrying out these kinds of activities, but whether that is the same thing as what you mean by financial incentives. I think incentives are more linked to the outcomes of a project, and kind of maybe a bit more a broader concept, but support is definitely available. Siggy is asking whether we feel like our university will improve its quality processes as a result of this work. I would say, but maybe not the quality framework or the quality processes that we have in place, but more specifically, what was the theme of our bench learning activity, which was the continuous development of teachers' professional competencies. We definitely were able to sort of pull out tangible outcomes that we could then implement through our development program. So I would say that yes, we definitely benefited. It's not that we just picked out the best action points from our Amsterdam colleagues and implemented them at JYU, but it was more through the process of going through the discussions and going through the project together that we were able to come into conclusions and into outcomes that then led to development at both institutions. So it's maybe a bit more complicated than just straightforward implementation.
Okay. Then maybe you could just respond to the final one, in the chat, if you can provide some links.
Someone is asking for the strategy plan for teaching and learning. Yeah, I can definitely put the link up in the chat box.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I think this is something that we have to learn from, certainly, how we actually, how we learn from some international partners. I think we have to look abroad more than here within the country for this sort of bench learning. So this is very useful. Thank you. And then we'll take the last presentation in this round, and this is Peggy Pavletic, and she comes from ESU, which is the European Student Union, and she is going to talk about the sort of students' perspective to this internationalization. So Peggy, please.
Thank you. I will just share my screen. Hello, everyone. As they mentioned before, my name is Peggy, and I am a newly elected member of the Executive Committee of the European Students' Union, which is an umbrella organization that represents the students throughout Europe. Technically, we have 45 members now and over 20 million students that we represent, kind of a background on the organization itself. And the topic that I will present to you today is the growing potential of internationalization in quality improvement of higher education. And this is a topic that we had an opportunity to discuss within ESU a lot of times. And we also have a position paper on the internationalization itself. And this is where I mostly drew the inspiration for this presentation as well, but also with the from the conversations with the National Union of Students from Iceland. So how did ESU actually define what is internationalization? We defined it as the process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, or delivery of post-secondary education. This is something that's defined by Knight from 2004, but this is something that we adopt as a universal definition of internationalization within the organization itself. And we consider it actually a very powerful tool for achieving high quality of education, but we also think that this quality needs to come from different intercultural competencies that the participants will gain from the internationalization, and that will be used for personal growth of the participant in internationalization. And we define through our policy papers two types of internationalization users, which can be mobile students or educators, and they can be international students or educators, so both incoming and outgoing participants. And I have also put up here the link towards the internationalization and mobility policy paper, which was published by ESU in 2019. If we look at the institutional internationalization, it needs to be looked at from a very broad perspective. So this not only means taking in outgoing, taking in incoming staff, which is which participates in the mobility, but also it includes hiring permanent international teaching and research staff, because we think that this will also contribute to the quality of the institution itself, but also the internationalization at the institution as a whole. And it will also be very beneficial for the students to maybe speak with the people who come from different backgrounds and to have teaching staff from different cultures, because it will also create this internationalization perspective, not only to those who participate in the internationalization per se as mobile people, but also to those who are actually coming into contact with persons who are participatory in the internationalization in this regard, hired as a teaching staff. So this also means that we need to assure the sufficient language, pedagogical and multicultural skills of the staff. And this is something that we are constantly mentioning through the QA procedures, that this is something that needs to be looked at. So it's not only necessary for the staff to be using English language as a part of their research and a part of their teachings, but also they need to have pedagogical and multicultural skills that the students can benefit from actually in the end. Also, this includes funding programs for the staff mobility, and they need to also receive more support, which means that if the staff wants to conduct some sort of mobility, all the other activities that the staff needs to do at their regular work need to be kind of transferred to the colleagues, or just have a more supportive working environment as well. We see the need for the integration of acquired knowledge of the outgoing staff or the outgoing students into the institution itself, because this is how the institution can benefit actually from this international experience of the participants. And we also see that validating this external knowledge learned is something that's really necessary. As a part of the publication that we are actually issuing today, which is the Bologna with Student Eyes, we see that this validation is actually something that's extremely important to students, but we see also that it's the highly efficient way of the recognition of competencies from these mobilities when the students are either going or incoming at different institutions. And also we need to make sure that the international students have equal opportunities, and this is maybe a thing that is being a little bit problematic, because we see that sometimes when students visit different countries, they don't have the same opportunities. For example, housing opportunities, scholarship opportunities, diet opportunities, or similar opportunities that maybe the local students can benefit from severely. And as I said, when we are mentioning internationalization, we often limit ourselves to Europe as well, or more particularly to the institutions, but we should rather consider it a globalization, because we in today's world are really the citizens of the world, and we have all the institutions and all the programs at our access, as more institutions are actually being a part of this mass movement of internationalization. If we look at the scope of it, internationalization can be provided through the establishment of transnational education franchises, offshore campuses, university networks, and we of course have the joint degree programs, which are on the rise, especially through the university alliances. And the main objective of the internationalization should be actually the benefit of the students in enhancing the quality of education, and how this can contribute not only to the students, but to the academic community in a whole. Physical mobility also is something that should be prioritized over internationalization at home, as this will truly provide for the intercultural experience and the immersion in the culture of another country. And the effective students' representation is, of course, a priority, because we need to make sure that our students who are either incoming or outgoing can have different student structures that can represent them well, and they can assure their rights there. Some of the potential threats that we see from the student's perspective is the lack of staff preparation for an international surrounding. So we actually see a rise in the international programs, and in comparison to that, we see that actually the staff is not being trained for the international surroundings per se, but rather the competencies of the staff are being included as they are as a part of an international experience for incoming students. And this is something that we consider should be changed, because preparation of the staff for teaching and for developing different outcomes and developing different programs for students will also require quite a preparation by the higher education institutions to assure the same level of quality throughout the program, no matter what the language is. Also, we see that the student support systems are non-developed or underdeveloped, and this is not only a criticism to the institution itself, but also to maybe the student support, because we also see that, for example, the student representation cannot effectively reach the students, and now more than ever because of the GDPR measures, and we see the need of cooperation between the students and university to kind of gain access to all of these international students and to make sure that they have proper representation as well. Availability of services in foreign languages is also a problem, but I think this is actually something that's changing and becoming more and more developed each day. Connected to what I said before, practicing students' rights is as well a necessity, and the higher education's prestige or financial benefit should not be a leading motivation to develop new programs, although we see from some analysis that we have done in the past that also the institutions see this as one of the lead motivators to develop these new programs. And this is something that you can actually see here in the table. So the enhancement of international profile and reputation in Europe makes for the largest actually sum of the participants, considering it an important and the most important let's say factor of the internationalization. And I have put here the source of this research, and this is something that we are really trying to change at this point. So we think that the financing of the internationalization is also one of the bigger reasons why the university cannot implement it completely. And here the support structure needs to come from outside the universities and the higher education itself. It needs to come from the government or from the European funds as well. Outgoing mobility opportunities for students and are actually something that is on the rise, but we also need to see need to look at the not only the outgoing but also the incoming opportunities that we will create for the other students. And we see 41 to 49% actually list this as a highest priority for the European universities. And we also see that the strengthening of the international or intercultural content of a curriculum is a priority for 30% of the universities, which means that all of the factors that I have previously mentioned are a big must if we are to create really the curricula which will be completely internationally inclusive. The potential that we see in it is the open science, virtual activities, less bureaucracy between the institutions themselves, peer support that can be provided in one single language. In the European context, it's also promoting European citizenship, but also global citizenship, as I said before. We have easier recognition procedures or automatic recognition between the institutions, which have formally established agreements. Knowledge exchange and micro-credentials can unlock a really big, let's say, opportunities in internationalization world for students, because it can also allow students to kind of gain expertise from other institutions while being at home. And this is something that their institution can recognize as something really important in nurturing this international experience of the students. If we look at the internationalization in the digital surroundings, it's seemingly more accessible, but we see the reports of students saying that it's actually quite less attractive. It's easier to share and gather data, which is also a threat to us because of the GDPR, and we do not know how to behave in this world still yet completely, even 1 year after the start of the pandemic. And we have less practical skills developed in students, but this brings the potential for developing micro-credentials recognition system. And also what we see as the main problem is the fact that internationalization at home is a non-immersive experience due to students not being to fully immerse themselves into the international culture of the countries. And some of the main findings of our assessment that was done in the previous years, so from the Bologna follow-up group, so it was done partially by ESU, and we tested full-time, part-time, undergraduate and graduate students. And actually 57% of them prefer this face-to-face type of classes. So that's it from my side. I apologize if I was a little bit too long, but it was quite an extensive topic, and I really find it good that we talk about these things and that we are developing internationalization day by day.
Well, thank you very much, Peggy. Very interesting indeed, and always good to get the students' perspectives into this discussion. Absolutely. I think we'll just take a very short break now, and we have a panel discussion after the break. Skúli, you had some, do you want to say something? I see you put your hand up.
Just clapping.
You're clapping, sorry, I'm not, good enough about these signals. Anyway, and so I think we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 3:05, and then Guðrún Geirsdóttir is going to take the lead for the panel discussion. Guðrún, thank you. So I'll see you again in a few minutes. Thank you very much so far.